Hi, welcome to FinTech Fun Talks. Today we have an amazing guest. We're excited to talk to Ashley Elsner. She is a lawyer in the FinTech and innovation world that works with startups, and she's a fractional general counsel and two-time tech founder. So, Ashley, tell us a little bit more about yourself and what brought you to where you are today.
It's a great question. There's a number of things that impacted my career. Like cannot say enough wonderful things about the people who have mentored me along the way, about the access to information that I've had from really great sources that are like highly vetted. So,
Mm.
up in New York when I was at Sidley Austin, there were absolutely wonderful there. I was at Bessemer Venture Partners for a while and learned so much about VC, about technology investment, about how VCs kind of think through and orient about their strategic considerations for investing activities and how to kind of design an investment thesis.
Yeah.
Um, and what that really means, how you vet the companies, like what you're really looking for. And, from there, Northwestern Law and Kellogg MBA. So, like more fantastic sources of information. Like this is something that's very difficult in the private company space in particular, because there's a lot of noise. There just is.
Yeah.
Private capital markets are a different animal than public capital markets. Public capital markets have a lot more checks on the information that's coming out of it. A lot more verification is done. And so you kind of have to get very quick on the read in the private capital markets because there's a lot of opportunity cost that also comes up. So, I've just been very lucky to have gone through the channels that I've gone through and had the people that took an interest in me take an interest in me. And I want to add like some sincere shout outs also to some of my former co-founders, because actually they were highly influential in what I focused on in terms of my own growth activities. Because, as a founder and frankly, as a human, I think we're always trying to work on becoming better in some
Hmm.
particular aspect and, putting into practice these really implementation of good habits, right?
Yeah.
Because good habits create great foundations, right? And, I've been very lucky to have, both formal training, academic training, informal training, and even that peer group that I learned so much from. I want to give a shout out to Kabir Sehgal and a shout out to David Gardner, that were the founders, the first in on Green Shoe Asset Management. They were
Hmm.
very, very cool. I learned a lot from them about being patient. And actually, I learned even more also from I want to give a shout out to Steve Gonzalez and Mike Shim and Phil Glazer, my founding team from Artery Pay too, that were so highly influential, teaching me. They were extremely important in my development. Honestly, any of my accomplishments are attributable also to the efforts of other people. And I
Isn't that
just want to be clear
interesting?
about that. Team
Yeah.
matters, team, collaborators, so important.
Collaboration, mentorship, leadership, all of those things that you don't necessarily think about when you're starting your career, but that end up being so influential and like that you're so thankful for that. I think a lot of people don't necessarily recognize how much it is about the team and about the group. No one can accomplish what what we can say you've accomplished on their own, right? Or
No
what I've
way.
accomplished. It's all about the people that we have worked with, learned from, been led by in the past.
Yeah. And team building it's important across business management in general. It doesn't actually matter what stage of business you're talking about, but it's so critical and foundational to have, a great management team for founding activities. I mean, you've got to have people who frankly know how to problem solve,
Right.
right? Across cross functionally.
Right. And I like that you mentioned too that the leaders that you were inspired by had both that leadership presence, but also a genuineness to them
Yes.
and how it makes them approachable and respectable at the same time. Like that's a really great combination that you don't always see, but that really is so important when you're looking to build a company, have your employees invested, and just see the type of growth that you're looking for, I think.
Yeah, and actually, I was very blessed to have mentors that were about 10 to 15 years older than me. And so they have seen the things that I don't know about yet.
Mhm.
And like I said, there's a lot of noise, especially in the private capital markets, and it's very hard to figure out who's actually on market with their information. And actually, it takes a long time to develop that. I would say that, where I am now is not where I was when I started and
Mhm.
got access to these incredible people.
And I feel like they come along at the right time in your path as well to prepare you for the next step. And call it
Mhm.
fate if we want, right?
Yeah, I mean, you could say fate. I say that it's also making sure that you put yourself in the room, right?
Mm.
Because actually you have to get access to these people if you're trying to do the opportunities, and that's going to take you, frankly, showing proof. This is such an important part of the founding is proving that you in fact can execute, right? Everyone's like, "Oh, the idea, the idea." Execution is actually what's important in business.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to be ready to take the action and not
Yeah.
just observe.
Yes, and it's true that the early stage space has sort of defaulted into a lot more of the research and development in
Mm.
determining, okay, well, we don't know which doors to open, right? We don't know which doors are actually going to lead to fruits in the innovation space. And big business, you can't really expect to be focused on that because that's not their field, right?
Right,
And
right.
so, frankly, determining whether there's even a market for these things, like that's the first step. And you can't you know, you've gotta see whether there's something there first, whether the door is worth pursuing, and so that's another thing that I think is really helpful for founders to hear.
I wanted to talk to you about Artery Pay, which is one of the businesses that you founded, and you saw that there was a need in the industry. So, segueing from that, where you see a need and you provide a solution, Artery Pay was fintech for the cannabis industry, or it is. So, cannabis and fintech aren't exactly the most traditional pair, but what were some of the early challenges that you faced bringing those two together?
Look, so I'm laughing a little bit because I actually knew what I was up against there, and
Yeah.
I think that there's a lot of folks that go into these sectors not realizing how hard it's going to be, and I was like, "I'm picking a hard challenge here." I'm picking one that is very, very difficult. And, frankly, the extendability beyond this that makes it a big picture versus like something that's really a niche market. This is
Right.
not really a niche play, is that fintech itself is already high risk.
Exactly.
It's already high risk, right?
Yeah.
Cannabis is a different type of high risk.
Mhm.
Fintech is high risk by the nature of the business model.
Right.
Cannabis is high risk by the nature of the legal treatment. And we have a confusing regulatory schematic going on right now in the cannabis space that is not helping. It's tough. And I definitely feel for the folks, the operators in that space, and also them having to contend with TE and not even being able to, frankly, use their profitability to grow their business and also not having access to capital as a result, again, of this strange legal treatment here in the US, something that would be a very viable both product market space very much, and also a very viable for healthcare as well in certain avenues. Basically, what I was looking at there and the inspiration for Artery Pay, and the reason that I made the jump, this was highly strategic. Highly strategic. It was a niche market that had some very strong challenges from both a legal regulation perspective, but also from a coming in from the black market, trying to get things cleaned up, trying to kind of push good record keeping to make sure that you're not mixing legal product with illegal product, and that legal product is not winding up on the illegal markets as a result of other things
Yeah.
going on that some of them like actually pretty unfair.
Right.
And of course, like let the dispensary owners and the folks working on product in the cannabis space actually talk to you about their challenges.
Mhm.
But so basically, I'm looking at what is a state legal market with practically no access to financial services and saying to myself, this is a legal market. It's actually not okay that they don't have access to financial services,
Right.
right?
Right.
And there is in the US in particular, financial sector is regulated.
Mhm.
I don't care what type of product it is. If you're not regulated at the federal level, you are regulated by state.
Right.
And look, that's going to vary on a state by state basis. That's particularly true for payments, right? Payments is state regulated. There are some facets of the payment sector that are also federally regulated, which has to do the transaction monitoring and that being reported appropriately to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. And so this is a relatively complicated regulatory framework. Specialists understand the regulatory frameworks, the folks that have worked in fintech, the folks that have worked in the financial sector, and I do mean traditional finance and traditional things. It doesn't mean that they don't love the new technology. And I'm like, I was one of them. I was very excited about some of the new technology that was coming out that frankly addressed a lot of these problems without really requiring a whole lot of development effort. And blockchain is almost like a tailor-made transactive solution that is highly transparent. And look, I'm not actually talking about cryptocurrencies at this time or digital assets or other types of things that are running on the blockchain, because actually blockchain is something that you can use for such a variety of information transfer and connect it back to different technologies to actually really build out some incredible use cases for implementation of different types of tech systems within your business. And I found that really exciting. I also felt like it was a great thing to build both the transaction and the compliance together on top of the perspective on the delivery of services in the financial sector. So yes, I really am a fintech nerd, not a cannabis nerd.
But you saw a need and you saw an avenue
An
that was
immediate
not being
market need.
covered.
Yes,
Yeah,
and this is another thing that people are not really aware of with respect to the financial sector is that it being so heavily regulated does mean that actually to a certain extent a lot of the operations in it are so heavily legally defined, and actually you get the best practices from the government.
right,
They actually work with industry leaders to develop those best practices, and that's what ends up in the regulations. And
right.
there are people who would debate me on that, but I'll be like, nah, I think I can prove it. I
Mhm.
can prove it with data.
And you had the experience and background to be able to back that up as well. Yeah.
Well, yes, and look, I'm making broad statements here, but I care a lot about the impact between basically this intersection of law, economics, and policy, right? And how this impacts business and how this impacts our markets. I focus on the US just because you gotta focus on something, right? You gotta focus in on like where you're mostly active. And that's not to say that there isn't fantastic stuff that goes on globally speaking with fintech. In fact, we were not the first adopters here. We were not. In fact, we're still way behind the global sector in terms of adoption of new financial technologies that are actually making the cost of running the operations for financial institutions much lower.
Okay.
And that's kind of what we were going at there too. The cannabis fintech side of this, there is this balloon of compliance requirements that you actually end up having to go through when you're dealing with high risk businesses. And they're even more with cannabis because, again, it's coming in from the black market. And what people don't know about the financial sector is that financial institutions actually get held responsible for illegal activity that happens on their
Mhm,
platforms.
mhm.
So if you're talking about a transaction system, say for example, we're talking Visa, okay? Since we're going to be
Right,
talking about, you know, is card processing allowed in the cannabis sector?
right,
No, in the US.
right. Isn't that interesting how it can be so different depending on where you are geographically?
Well, that's based on the laws because the laws in every jurisdiction are going to be different and they're going to be tailored to what the lawmakers in that jurisdiction think is correct. And the regulations actually are typically developed by the folks who are specialists in that industrial sector
Mhm.
and not actually by your lawmakers. So when you start talking about the SEC, for example, the Securities Exchange
Yes.
Commission,
Yeah.
yeah, they are so very, very good at capital markets regulation and enforcement. And they do not have the budget to do it to people's public understanding of how regulation works in this country, which is actually a mismatch to what is actually done. There's a lot of
Interesting.
misunderstanding of the financial services sector, I think, in the US in general.
Do
And I mean from the broader market. I mean from kind of like consumer side.
Okay. Yeah.
Consumers of these products tend not to understand because it's so specialist. It's so specific.
It is, and it can be very complex as well. Like, just it's a
It
lot
is.
for someone to dive into.
It is, and it's additive. It's not instead of. And this is actually one that I think is an important concept for founders to understand that you are responsible for complying with corporate law. You are responsible for complying with laws that are specific to your industry. You are responsible for complying with all of the laws that are specific to your industry, not picking and choosing. And the
Right.
fact is, actually, you
Exactly.
can be regulated by multiple regulators at the same time. And in the
Mhm.
financial sector, while I would have a very good time actually going through and trying to harmonize a lot of it to make it less complex for people to understand what their regulations, what they're responsible for in the business sector. The fact is, actually, if you're going into the financial sector in particular, you know it's regulated. You're on notice that, frankly, you need lawyers helping you design your business model. That is not optional. It just isn't.
And that there are specific lawyers out there who are well versed in financial law who can help
Yeah.
with this type of thing.
And actually financial business management, because this is another well-kept secret from the financial industry, is that the operations are primarily actually conducted by legal teams, specialized
Exactly.
specialized legal teams, but legal and accounting are just these are not optional costs. They're cost of doing business in the financial sector. They
Good
just are.
point. So, one question for you on regulation. Do you feel like the regulators are catching up fast enough, or is the industry still two steps ahead of the law, specifically with these emerging markets like cannabis?
No, no. In fact, the regulators are, and this is another thing because the regulators, remember, they have to be careful what they say. Lawyers and regulators and everybody, the fact is what happens to you is going to be specific to your situation. You can't give blanket answers about these things because there's so much variety in what business managers are trying to do. And so you really need the specifics of what it is that they're looking to do. And a lot of the times they're not clear yet. That's in flux, right? And
Mhm.
so they're giving you kind of like these, well, I just asked you the question. It's like, yes, and I asked you a follow-up question.
And where do we
Yes.
stand now? And who's going to answer that?
And if you don't answer the follow-up question, I can't give you an answer on your first question. And this is another thing about like how you work with lawyers too. If they're asking you a question, it's not based on judgment. It's
Mhm.
not. It's because they need to know the information to give you an answer. I mean, it's sort
Yeah.
of like talking to your doctor. It doesn't help you to hide things from your doctor related to your health conditions. It does not. And related to your personal behavior, it does not.
Right.
And the
That's
same thing
true.
is true, frankly, when you've got corporate lawyers or finance lawyers, right? Securities lawyers. It does not help you, frankly, when they are literally on your team
Hmm.
for you not to be transparent with them. And one of the things that they don't like, that a lot of times people don't like hearing is, I'm sorry, this is not a legal business model, the way that you've got this specced out. And they're like, well, that's not fair. Yes, yes, it is. Because like actually you're not the only consideration in this particular thing here. And so actually, I think the regulators, frankly, have a very good feel for what's going on. They actually do know what they need to be doing in order to properly regulate these markets, including crypto, by the way,
Yeah.
including
Good.
crypto. And the fact is, actually, I would say that you've got some founders that are just not listening. And I don't think that's every founder. There's a
No.
lot of very legitimate stuff being built in both Web3, on blockchain, in the digital asset space. And that's the thing. When it comes to the regulations, what I know is that these products are going to be regulated based on what they do. What are they replacing? This is so funny because like I'm going to go ahead and mention this because I think every founder needs to read this and it's not very long. Porter's Five Forces. Haha. That's just a strategic text, right? It's a strategy text that you get taught in your intro to strategy class at MBA.
Mhm.
And it's like, I don't know, like maybe 15, 20 pages in length. It's very, very to the point. There's an update that needs to be made to it that has to do with regulated spaces where you also need to be paying attention to what's
Mhm.
going on with government law and enforcement. And actually,
Right.
government, I'm talking about policy. Like what are people currently concerned about?
Mhm.
Regulation, which is a totally different group of folks. Like lawmakers are the ones who are concerned about X and trying to determine what laws to put out. Regulators are the ones that actually are giving you the details about what you need to do. And then, of course, you've got law, which is like when you don't listen to either of these guys, you got heck to pay.
Here's the consequence.
And that's the thing, just because the regulators are not allowed to enforce because there may be political objectives or there may be resource issues, right? Just because
Mhm.
they're kind of being handcuffed at any particular point does not mean that you have a free for all. That's not how capitalism works. That's some zero when people start engaging in more like fraud-based activity instead of real genuine business.
It is unique and difficult in these emerging markets in the cannabis space. And so, from your experience, why does fraud tend to flourish in those spaces?
In emerging markets,
Yeah.
yeah, and look, I don't know that you're necessarily that it flourishes. I think there's a lot of confusion when
Mhm.
people are inexperienced in a particular field. And so many people are like, well, business management, you don't need any additional information to be able to run your own business. And it's like, well, a VC backed one, yes, you do. Now, if you're talking about your corner store, yeah, that's a relatively simple business model that has to do with like, okay, you purchase inventory, you put it out, and actually these have gotten a lot more complex, but we're just going to use a small one where the business model is like you buy your inventory, you sell your inventory, and then you basically find the business becomes self-funding as a result of, you buying inventory and then selling it to your community. And the very basic bit of business, right? And this is just normal capitalism, normal business management, normal, why do you even go into business? to be able to support yourself, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And so there's a big difference between a business that has scalability and a business that does not. So there's that side.
Right.
But this idea that you can just have basically like a small business manager's abilities and think that you're going to be able to build something huge that's actually world changing,
Mm.
that's just unreasonable. That's an unreasonable expectation. You got to be able to crawl before you can walk, before you can run. And look, that is one that actually I got from Steve,
Yeah.
my co-founder, one of my co-founders at Artery Pay. So, crawl, walk, run. Figure out what you're doing first before you start trying to say that you're building the next big thing. You need to see whether you even have a viable business, period. And this is one of the things is people start saying that they've done things that they haven't done. And then when you go back and you're like, well, I'd like to see your records, they're like, oh, I can't show you that. It's confidential. And it's like, no, your business records you could show me is subject to an NDA. That's not your special sauce. Or at
Right.
least your business record should not be your special sauce. That's an indicator that there's fraud. I'm sorry to say it, but like your special sauce should not be fudging the facts.
Mhm.
That is fraud.
Mhm.
And there's another tricky bit to this when you're in the innovation space and you've got true innovators. And this is another place where things get confusing is that people will also be founders in particular, they live in their future state sometimes. And sometimes they literally cannot fathom that they have not in fact built these things yet, and yet they are way out ahead of themselves in terms of where their development in fact is, and that includes their pipeline, their sales pipeline.
Mm.
And that's a fundamental one that's actually very important for them not to be fibbing about where they are from a traction perspective. From the development perspective, hiccups come on in development all the time, so timelines can get pushed, and
Right.
it's not unreasonable for there to be some extensions with respect to that. But like, frankly, there should be no question about what's going on in the business management, like the receipts, the contracting, the how much revenue does the business have? How many customers have you acquired? What's your growth rate month over month, year over year? Like, there shouldn't really be any questions as to like really kind of your basic business fundamentals that yes, your corner store guy probably does already know and do
Mhm.
correctly. But then when you start trying to scale it up, yeah, he needs help. He needs help to
Right.
actually accurately do that. You don't have any help in the founder space. You've got to be able to do basically all the skilling activities yourself at first. So, there's a lot of challenges there. And unfortunately, as a result of that, there's a lot of miscommunication in the founder space. Plus, again, you've also got noise. You've got market noise where there's false market signals being sent out that
Mm.
cause people to think they need to keep up when actually there was nothing that was said.
So, question for you. You've mentioned some of the difficulties that you'll come across in scaling. And if you don't have the right support with, let's say, having counsel and, the type of business leaders in place when you're scaling. So, if you were starting Artery Pay right now in 2025 instead of when you did, what would you do differently?
Boy. Well, first off, I had a lot of additional research that I had to do on the cannabis sector because I knew nothing about it. And it was like, okay, I've got to do market research. I've got to
Interesting.
do
Okay.
market research on this. So, like, literally, I'm already ahead on that.
Yeah.
I get to skip the time that I actually
Yes.
spent on that, and I can go directly to, like, what you build. Frankly, the stuff that I was piloting back then is still valid today. I mean, COVID unfortunately disrupted a lot of things with respect to the technology space as well, and with
Yeah.
respect to actually trying to develop genuine solutions for certain types of problems that exist, like this gap in the market for, financial services, for the cannabis sector that was really not caused actually by law, but was caused by certain fragmentations in our financial system that actually are a good thing mostly, but make it harder to get these things deployed. You don't have a single source that you can just push it through. But now I have relationships in place that I know who to go to. I know who's got the best rates. hmm
Mm-hmm.
for bank backing and for, doing the type of product that we were working on then. Um,
Right.
you still can't do card processing in the space legally. And look, the reason why, again, is because you're submitting transactions to a party saying that it's one thing when it's something else, and that's miscoding and that's illegal. That's
Right.
money laundering all damn day, whether you like it or not. And that's what I'm talking about, where I was trying to say earlier about how it can be fraud related to your business recording, your business systems. Because if you're sitting there and saying your special sauce, like literally should not be coming from you fudging your records, that's what I was talking about there.
Yeah.
it is illegal to money launder, right? Miscoding is a violation of your terms of the product being provided to you, for example, on the card network side, and that transaction processing being allowed on their platform. It's not allowed. It's a violation of the contract with them. You can be sued for that.
Mhm.
You can also be taken down by regulators again for the fraudulent processing. Then you can also actually be prosecuted for the money laundering. I mean, it's additive in the financial sector when you start fudging around with things on literally your record keeping. That is not kosher, period. The other
It
thing is
is.
using people's systems that they're not allowing you to use for purposes that they don't allow you to use it for. So if there's another example that I've got where there were some folks that without approval from the bank folks, they
Mhm.
were, creating basically a bypass for the security systems for the banks for consumers to be able to just like be like, oh, well, I want to do blah, 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 and basically bypass the rules that are in place for compliance in the financial sector
Mm.
at these banks. And it's like, guys, there's no way that's legal. That's actually literally you're talking and this is where things get tricky because in the tech sector they have learned for the sake of tech is legitimate reason, and it's
Mhm.
not. It's not. Doing things because you can is not legitimate, and frankly, you're not gonna get legitimate people paying you for that.
And to lay that as your business foundation is so rocky, you
Oh my
know?
gosh, what are you doing?
Yeah.
What are you doing? You think that hacking legitimate businesses and providing, your own access points, basically hijacking it? You think
Mhm.
that's a legitimate business? Like, where?
And do you see this often? I'm curious, like, how many people are out there doing this type of thing?
Well, this is the thing. I have lived and worked all across the country.
Okay.
So I have seen quite a lot of interesting behavior in the financial sector of folks who don't come from the financial sector. They come from like a technical background, or
Yeah.
maybe they come from some other background where they don't actually understand what rules are in play in the financial sector. And so they're sitting there and trying to argue matters of law when they don't understand the law.
It's just their opinion.
Yeah, it's their personal opinion that it shouldn't be. And it's like,
Right.
well, you
But
just
it
feel that
is.
way, frankly, because you want to build a business this way, and they're telling you no. And your solution to a barrier to entry is to basically try to, like, from a business management perspective, it's basically forcing
Yes,
your own
right? But
intentions on
friendly
somebody who's not
fire or
agreeing.
yeah,
Who's
it's
not agreeing. That's not legitimate business. Like, where did you get the idea that you can force these things,
right.
or that is ever going to be okay? I mean,
Right.
that doesn't
Because it
make any
benefits
sense.
them.
Exactly, and this is the thing, the whole reason why it is illegal is because if you do it, other people will too, and that creates a huge mess, right?
Mhm.
A huge mess from actually from a legitimate business perspective, where it's like, I'm how do I even contract with people as a vendor to them if they're going to be lying to me about what the reason is for them using my transaction system?
Yeah, and it delegitimizes the whole industry.
The
It
entire financial
causes
sector.
issues.
Yes, and yeah, that it hits the financial sector, it hits the founder sector. Because, like, honestly, if you're building this way, you're making other fintech founders look bad,
Exactly.
because we're gonna get lumped in with the people who are not doing the right thing and who aren't building a business.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think we get your point and the difficulties that it can
It's
cause for
hard.
everybody when you've got a
It's
few
hard.
bad players.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Again, like, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So you may think that you're doing the right thing, little Mr. Business Manager, little founder, right? But the
Yeah.
problem is you need to think about how this works in the context of the broader economy and stop thinking that everything's about you. I mean, it's honestly, like, I hate to say it, but it's a little entitled.
For sure. I think that that's a really good way to put it because
Yeah.
it is about them and their benefit rather than how this could be impacting different groups or individuals out there.
Yes.
Yeah.
And founders, actually, you don't see a whole heck of a lot of people engaging in genuinely deliberate fraudulent conduct in the founder space. But there are a lot of people who follow Pied Pipers, unfortunately. And there are also a lot of people who will be like, well, this is how I feel about it. So I'm going to tell everybody that this is what's true, when actually they're kind of opining on something they don't have the background to opine on. I mean, in particular, I'm sorry, but like, if you come from a different function, you may not, in fact, know the law that applies to you. You might
Yeah.
not. It depends. And
Well,
actually, there's good faith and fair dealing embedded in every single contract. That's literally an implied covenant in every single business contract. And the good faith part of it is that you're being honest, and fair dealing is that you're not abusing your position.
It's kind of like what you were saying earlier about the lessons learned with Artery Pay and what you might do differently. A lot of it was knowledge based. A lot of it was the
Oh,
things that you have learned. And there's an accountability to make sure that you do those things. Some of them you can learn along the way. But when it comes to law and regulation, you've got to know it in advance.
yes, you do. And actually, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure kind of situation. It really is because, like, actually, if you don't listen to your corporate lawyers on these things, you're going to have to deal with litigation. And actually, there's no way to cap those costs.
Exactly.
I mean, like, you
It
have no
can,
idea how long it's going to take.
it can, and I think often does just,
Oh, it's a budget killer.
yeah, just drown a business, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can. Impacts your reputation too as a founder. This is the
Yeah.
other thing people need to be aware of is the fact that, like, actually, if people get the sense that you as a business manager tend to engage in fraudulent activities, they're not going to work with you long term.
Absolutely,
I
and
mean,
that's a
that's
hard thing to bounce back from.
yeah. Oh my God, you can't. You can't
Yeah,
bounce back from it. I mean, does anybody actually think that Elizabeth Holmes will work in business ever again?
right,
Really?
right, the name is out
Really?
there. Yeah,
Yeah, and honestly, like, it was unfortunately a huge black eye on the founder community, huge
yeah,
black eye. And that's the thing. Most everybody's in here in good faith, doing their best to actually commercialize kind of academic ideas. Like, that is a lot of what's going on. It's a lot of
right.
commercialization of innovation, commercialization of infrastructure plays, real novelty to business models, not like, oh, I can do it better because I'm me.
Mhm, right. I've got one final question for you. If you could give one piece of advice to entrepreneurs who are tackling regulated industries, what would that be?
Read the regulations.
Yeah,
And look,
simple as
that is
that, and then implement them.
yes, I mean, this is the whole thing. If you're in a regulated industry, these are not optional. So when you're sitting here and saying that you're not complying with regulation, but that doesn't mean you're not complying with law, yes, it does.
Right.
Yes, it does. The regulations are really the implementation of the law. And you not following them, like, really to the letter is asking for trouble in a variety of different ways. And actually, to a certain extent, especially in the financial sector, they're giving you the best practices that actually got developed by players that are far further along when it comes to comes to knowing how to deliver these services.
Mhm.
Because this is something that I actually love about our regulatory community, and this again goes back to the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. The way that they actually determine what new regulations they're going to put into play is there's a comment period that tends to be a year or two where they're taking industrial comments from basically the folks who care to comment, and they're taking frankly the input from the industry to actually determine what rules are reasonable, because, like, actually it is true, they're aware it's a high cost, but frankly running your business legitimately shouldn't bother you. That's a cost of doing
Yes.
business.
Right.
And them going in and actually doing this research with these best in class providers gives you access immediately to, like, what is the best thought leadership on how you run these firms. And look, it is true. There's a lot you can do with tech to take those regulations and put them in your technology. That's what we were doing at Artery Pay.
Yeah, and
It,
then it simplifies things so much.
it really does. And it takes a lot of the argument back and forth with
Mhm.
people out of it, because it's like, well, the rules have been embedded in the software and that's how it has to run.
Right, and as someone who has worked in the industry, I love that model because it makes things so much easier.
Does.
Yeah.
And it's tough because I definitely understand, frankly, on the relationship management and the sales side, you've got these metrics that you're having to hit, these targets that you're having to hit, and y'all are looking at the folks who are actually in the operations side that are handling the compliance and all these things to actually execute these
Mm.
orders. And they're the ones actually handling execution, not you. You're taking orders.
Right, right.
But when you're handling that execution, there's time involved, there's work involved, there's a lot to it. And a lot of times the folks on the either relationship management or the sales side or the marketing side do not understand how much work is actually involved in building these products and deploying these products and actually running these products and actually in providing these services.
Yeah,
Because,
that's true.
actually, like, the financial space hasn't really been productized on the operating side yet,
It
not
is
in
pretty
a
complex,
meaningful
that's
way.
true, yeah.
At least that was my experience when I was on the operating side, is that I would have loved to have seen more technology developed that was in line with how we in fact had to do business, like what rules applied to us.
Right, that
Yeah.
would yeah, I agree. I think that would make things so much better.
Mhm.
So, well, Ashley, thank you so much for joining us today and for all of the insights on the business law, regulation, and these emerging industries. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, Christy. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for watching our podcast today. I'm Kristen Nielsen. I'm the owner of Copper Canvas Ads Agency, and we partner with fintechs to help them scale their business within a 12-month period. I've been in the industry for over 20 years, and I've seen how saturated the market can be, and therefore how difficult it can be to make your business stand out in a sea of other fintechs that may look similar or maybe even slightly different. But how do you make yours stand out? How do you get your message to the right people and those with high buying intent? That's what Copper Canvas Ads Agency is here to do. We are a growth partner, and we take a deep dive into your business to really understand what your strong points are, where there may be areas of weakness, and how we can fill those areas of weakness and create a plan to move forward in a strong way and really scale. So if you are interested, simply go to our website, coppercanvasadsagency.com, and schedule a time. There are buttons right there on the front page for you to book a time, and then we'll love to talk to you and see what we're able to do together.